So Charlie, why is the ICEA interested in this global partnership with DDI?
Well, I think there's a huge opportunity here because you know, the MRP, we need to move towards a demand-driven method of dealing with MRP, and I don't think it's been out there over the last 30 years. We know the market's dynamically changing with the customers, shorter lead times, and issues like that. So we see this as a huge global opportunity. ISCA has had a huge amount of growth internationally, and one of the things we haven't been able to provide is really some form of demand-driven MRP or any kind of demand-driven systems in terms of supply chain. And I think there's a huge demand out there, and we think this is the wave of the future. And it's really kind of a unique and novel approach that you've come up with, and I think there's just a huge opportunity to help improve the performance of supply chains.
Great. Can you talk a little bit about the program, where it will be offered? You know, I assume you guys are a global.
Right. Yeah, it's going to be offered all over the world. We currently have programs going on in Singapore, Malaysia, India, China, the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Dubai, Qatar, Bangladesh, and in Europe as well. But mostly a lot of growth in the Mideast and the Southeast and the Far East.
Do you have anything to elaborate on at all?
It's funny because in the Mideast, what's going on, a lot of those companies are trying to develop some capability of sustaining the future away from oil.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they're trying to build these other capabilities. I think that's why there's such a growth potential there.
Well, and interesting too, China is focusing on lowering labor costs and reducing costs. You know, what's up with that?
What do you think a program like this will? What advantage do you think it will give somebody that goes through this program?
The individuals or the companies or both?
I think the individual and the company.
I think the individuals would be a huge boost to their career. I think one of the things that we've discussed here is how a lot of people who originally created the MRP system don't exist anymore. So this is the whole new wave of looking at MRP and the planning aspect. And I know, people are still fighting the same issue where they have, high inventory and stockouts both. And I think that's going to be huge things for companies to gain market share, to respond more quickly. And with changing manufacturing technologies, changing consumer taste, shortened lead times, this is the only way you're going to be able to do that. And if you try to go the route of having a bunch of inventory, it's going to be impossible to know what inventory you're supposed to be holding. And eventually I think you'll just go out of business because people will go to somebody else.
First question is, why does MRP really need to change? So from my perspective, I think it's pretty obvious that industry is caught between a rock and a hard spot. I mean, they're forced to use all kinds of manual workarounds. I mean, Excel is probably the predominant planning tool out there, despite the huge spend on ERP. I think we're living in a totally different world than when MRP was originally born. The world looks nothing like the late 50s, 60s. And we're grappling with that right now. And we've probably reached the point of diminishing returns where we can't continue to polish and optimize all these old rules. We've got to fundamentally break from the past and change some of those rules and bring those rules back into, up to code, so to speak. What do you think?
Well, I think that's true. I was thinking, going through my mind, even 25 years ago, being in a plant and having the person pull out a piece of paper in their back pocket. When you ask them, how are you doing your inventory, and there's some guy on the floor who has a piece of paper that he follows and ignores the system. And so I think it was a problem then, and now the dynamics of the whole environment have changed so much that I don't think people can use the sheet of paper in their back pocket anymore.
Fast enough.
Yeah.
And the reality is when you first look at computers, when they were first invented, we used them for tracking people, we did them for census, and we tracked inventory. So therefore, the whole MRP planning logic built on the fact of inventory at the core. And I think that's what's really rotten at the core today, is that for a company to be successful, it isn't about inventory. It's about a new core, if
About
you
the
will, of
customer.
demand. It's about
Yeah.
the customer.
Yeah.
You know, it's about having what I need, when I need it, at a price they want to pay, and being able to compete globally by being able to be faster and more efficient with the use of my resources to get a
Right.
better return on capital employed.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I think that companies they chase fool's gold because they focus on inventory. They focus on working capital as a primary issue.
Right.
And it just has a bunch of disastrous byproducts where, you know, what we're saying here is, look, no, focus on demand, focus on service, focus on what matters, and that's customers. And the byproduct of that is actually lower working capital.
Right.
It seems almost counterintuitive, but if you focus on working capital, you don't get good service. If you focus on service, DDMRP is going to let you get lower working capital.
Absolutely, because when you look at it, if you just say, I'm going to cut inventory, the easiest way to cut inventory is to reduce the inventory levels on the parts that I'm selling the most of,
Right.
which sets me up for
Right.
having a lot of shortages,
Right.
which means it's going to impact your revenue. So
A lot
in
of
fact,
excess.
what you're doing, you're reducing
Well, a
your
lot of
inventory.
excess inventory, the ones that you aren't selling.
And so that's
Yeah,
dead inventory,
yeah,
so that's
yeah.
really hard to reduce. So you end up doing the exact opposite of what you're looking for.
I think the thing too, where some people went, we were talking about earlier, that, you know, I think I'll go to make to order. Well, it's not make to order; it's make to demand. That doesn't mean that you make everything once the order comes in. It's a much different way, and I think the DDMRP system captures all that.
Well, it's that ability to sense and adapt more quickly to what's going on in the marketplace.
So let's see. Well, we kind of already said, but what's different with DD? Well, let's talk a little specifically about what is different in DDMRP. I think, you know, from my perspective, one of the first things that we're starting out with is rethinking where to place inventory, what to do with inventory, where can we break apart processes in a sensible manner to protect or compress lead times, to absorb or dampen variability. And when we do those things, good things happen with working capital, like reductions,
Right.
And customer service. I think another fundamental break that we're having with the past is, you know, we're moving away. We have a new demand component, right? If you try to run MRP today with sales orders, you get in trouble. But we
Right.
know that sales orders are much more reliable than forecasted orders, right? I mean, it's by definition. So DDMRP creates a mechanism in which you can actually run the sales orders through those decoupled points, those places that we place that inventory to get the good lead times. And then I think finally, for a big point for me is the idea of the execution side of things, that the moving industry away from priority by due date and moving them into priority by buffer status. And the fact that once again, it's a mirage that priority and due date actually correspond with each other. In fact, most senior buyers and planners know that some things that are due after others are actually more important today. The problem is in MRP today, you can't see it.
Right.
All you get is a date. From your perspective, what's different?
Not only do you only get the date, but you also are very hidden on some things that are critically important. Like I might have one part that's coming in late, but I don't know it if I'm the planner for the matching part. And so here I'm expediting and spending a lot of dollars and time and effort to try to get this thing in, and it's sitting in inventory, and dust is collecting on the box, so I'm still waiting for this part to come in.
Right.
So that horizontal dependency is hidden in current MRP.
Well, I think one of the things I like about this too is that I used to always kid around and tell people, if your boss asks you what you're doing, tell them you're balancing inventory. But kind of the joke was that people would put the inventory, kind of bounce it across all the things. And what I like about this DDMRP, it picks those strategic points where to hold inventory. And it tells you that, inventory here and inventory there isn't the same thing. It needs to be in this particular location. Kind of what you were talking about with the different components, that, having a little bit of everything everywhere doesn't necessarily solve the problem. Having those strategic inventory positions that DDMRP does, I think is really the key thing.
Well, and I think the biggest thing that changed on DDMRP is it solved the problem that companies are really facing today, which is that whole issue of material synchronization. It's not just about balancing, it's how do I synchronize it such that I can change and adapt to the marketplace. And it answers that issue. And those are tools that we couldn't even perceive and we didn't need before.
Right. Well,
we're managing an entirely different environment today than we were when MRP was invented.
We have more complex product structures. We have much more complicated supply. I won't even call them chains. I'll call them supply webs.
Yeah.
Right.
And we need
Shorter
some-
customer tolerance
Absolutely.
times, shorter product life cycles, more complicated products, more variety in
Yeah.
the products.
And the synchronization issue becomes the real limitation here. And MRP, conventional MRP, was never conceived with these kinds of issues
Right.
and requirements in mind. Okay, so the next question is, what's been the reaction from your perspective of the book and the method?
The reaction from the book and the method is that all of a sudden we've gone from being heretics to being mainstream. The number one reaction that I get is that people go, well, we do part of that.
Yeah.
I think for the first time what's happening is that there's a methodology, a fully embraced, described methodology that matches, finally for the
Right.
first time, a planner's intuition.
Exactly. That's a good thing, right? That means, if somebody says, well, I do some of that. Well, good.
Right.
That's because it's because you're experienced. You've learned how to survive. It goes according to your intuition. Now you need a codification of it. It needs to be transferable in your own organization. We need to have some standards, here, so that development can continue on, and it can't just be isolated in a spreadsheet or a person who has 25 years of experience in their head. It's time to take the intuition and harness it, put it into a defined method. And I think that the DDMRP, at least from what I've seen, planners and buyers take to it very quickly because it does coincide with their intuition, and also they can do more in less time. I mean, it's just intuitive for them.
Well, and it is. It's easy to understand. And some of the beauty that you look at things and you understand, everybody around the world understands red, yellow, green.
Right.
It's a common standard. Red in one country does not mean speed up. And green doesn't mean slow down. It's those colors are well understood. It's very intuitive. It's matching some of the things that these companies and these planners have been doing for years to survive. That they've been fighting against their current system because the current system doesn't do it the way they're doing it, and they know if they do it according to the rules that are in the current system, they're going to die.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I like, I was telling Carol, we've done some consulting type things where we've been involved in similar ideas, but what I like about your approach is that you've systematically gone through with the lean and the Six Sigma and all this and applied the theory and stuff. We kind of did that. I think, Chad, what you were saying about, we've done it like from intuition, and we knew we were combining all these things, but we never explicitly looked at each step and figured it out. That's kind of what I like about what you've done. You've kind of systematically gone and justified why you're doing every one of these things.
Real quick, let's do something for Dustin. My name's Chad Smith. I was co-founder of a company called Constraints Management Group in 1997. Before that, I worked directly for Dr. Ellie Goldratt, author of The Goal. So I have my roots firmly planted in the theory of constraints. And as we grew the firm and took on larger clients, we were forced to deal with the formal planning side because it was the number one impediment to us. And we knew that you can't just wipe it out. We had to solve the puzzle about how to make it work, in a totally new environment, in an environment that was centered around actual demand. And then Carol, you and I founded the Demand Driven Institute just last year. In anticipation of the book coming out, and anticipation of people wanting to know more.
Well, and
You want to talk about your background?
I can talk about my background. I'm Carol Patak, and I started out in manufacturing at minimum wage on the shop floor putting stuff together. This translates to I'm older than dirt. And then worked up to being a supervisor and finally a manager, and then left production and went into the consulting area for a while. Ran into the same kind of thing as what you saw with CMG, that you run into the software where you're fighting the software. So went back to work for a while at a software company. Went to work for IBM for a while in technology and in sales, and then was hired on at PeopleSoft as their vice president and global industry executive and responsible for that company's entire software strategy, where we coined the term demand driven in 2003 and spent a great deal of money marketing the term. Not that we really had a fully baked solution underneath it, but we knew the direction of the solution. And then you and I came together, of course, in 07 when I was at the university teaching, as we started to pull this thing together, and it started to take form, and we married the work that CMG was doing with some of the stuff that we were doing in the market around demand driven, and came up with an interesting solution, writing the book together. Predated that book, I'd written a book on MRP and one on ERP, co-wrote Necessary But Not Sufficient with Ellie Goldratt. And then took what I learned from that book, put it into the ERP book, and then we bought Demand Flow Technology during the time I was at PeopleSoft, so wrote a book on lean called Quantum Leap: The Next Generation. So it's been very interesting to pull this all together, as Charlie, you said, is pull it all together into a single work that leverages all those giants that stand on their shoulders to write this book.
Well, I don't have the amount of experience that you guys do, but I've been a college professor for 30 years, and I could probably entered the area similar to Carol, not on the shop floor, but working in manufacturing businesses. And I didn't realize now, I never really thought about Orlicki's book being written in 75 because I used it in 76 in college. So I guess I was on the cutting edge there. And then I remember I spent time in 78 with Junichiro Nakani and learned about JIT when he was over here. Eventually got involved using the goal in 86. Or somebody gave it to me in 84, 83, and then eventually in 2000s became a Jonah. So I've combined a lot of these areas as well, and been the executive director of education certification at ISCA. I don't even know, it's been 7-8 years now. I don't know exactly when.
Well, and I think the other thing interesting too is that you've been really involved with the APICS organization.
Yep,
you and I have known each other for many, many years through
Yeah.
APICS.
So if you didn't mention that.
Yeah, sort of mentioned it.
She's
You know,
past
I was,
president, yep.
past APICS International president and CEO in the year 2000. Charlie and I served together on the small manufacturing SIG group. I was VP of SIGs when you were, I think, chair of the SIG.
Yeah, I actually wasn't chair, but yeah, that was a good group. There were some very good people in there.
Well, we were really trying to bring some practical
Yeah.
solutions. So I think we all this culminated up into
Right.
this complete solution. I think it's really been a combination of lots and lots of people's work into a single work that now is Orlicki's third edition.
So why do we call it demand-driven MRP?
So why did we call it demand-driven MRP?
Because that's what it is.
Because that's what it is.
Well, I think it's first and foremost a formal planning solution. You know, and it still does generate material requirements plan, but it does it in a much different way than conventional MRP. So it is MRP, but it's not conventional MRP. It's a demand-driven MRP.
Well, and I think the important thing is it's not just planning; it's also execution, which is a big difference between MRP, MRP2, or ERP.
Yeah.
Is those really none of those cover the execution side? And I think the big key with demand-driven MRP is it's a closed-loop, fully codified approach to handling both planning and execution.
Well, I think that's what's great because it's all together. Because even when I've done this, we've done this before. We used the MRP materials, but we kind of always skirted our way around that and did other execution, and used middleware and passed information in and out and brought it back in. And I think it's better if you can have it all integrated in the one system that does your MRP and your demand-driven part.
Okay, we got a lot of.
Okay.
All right.
You can-
Dustin, anything else?
We probably killed your hard drive there.
All right, that's good.
Okay.
All right.
Do you have any
Anything?
other questions?
No,
Okay.
I don't have any other.